The biggest urban fires in Los Angeles were crushed within 24 hours. That left the delicate political task of destroying the worst damaged buildings. For political work in the climate crisis, this kind of triage was the ultimate urban management challenge. The intractable problems of LA's seaside urban slums had taught the family that lesson long ago. The family had learned that damaged buildings had to be demolished, and that demolition had to be done at breakneck speed, while the original pain of the disaster was still fresh. Otherwise, the cost of prolonged litigation would soar unbearably. Completely new buildings could be built for much less money and effort. The classic dispensation gamut was to charge in and discreetly smash the damaged buildings, while also rescuing their inhabitants. Naturally, the legal system had caught on to this sneak attack technique and put a stop to it. The next refinement was to smash the damaged buildings while leaving the facades apparently intact. The interiors were rebuilt in modern fashion with quick-setting fabrication. Smashing of defunct buildings was, by contrast, one of Rapmilla's personal specialties. Toddy was no longer there to advise with show production. and her steadying classic hand was sorely tested. Brett Miller's Carnival would briskly smash 3 damaged buildings in a mere hour and a half. A 10-story former insurance building in Central City, a 12-story hotel on Figueroa, and an adjoining mall. The family had piled on the effects of lavish and in dog day buildings overwhelmed any stunt engineer actors could do. The overblown demolition machinery that smashed the buildings supplied the coup de grace of urban spectacle. Of course, they were not mere dynamite or wrecking balls. They had to be obligatory monstrous escape pods, the latest mechanism of destruction, and designed to as an artist, she felt that this was difficult. It always pleased Ramilla to have a popular wit. Show business did have its native satisfactions for her. Shoulders back, chin up, big smile, deep breath, chest, timeless, gratifying zone of raw sensation. Ramilla absorbed show business right through her own skin. The unfolding ensemble, that happy roar of the crowds, the rank smell of the smoke, the dust and her own sweat, the physical effort of her dancing, the pervasive rhythms. Los Angeles was a mystical city by nature. It required its sacraments. Ramilla felt herself vanish into the ambient substance of the spectacle. She could feel herself just holding it all up, and then letting it go, with one almighty dust-hurling thump. With a final bone-blasting flourish of her soundtrack, Ramilla wire-walked off the top of the rollicking tripod, capered straight up the side of a building, and vanished into thin air. Ascending into the heavens was something of a family cliche. Still, when it came to lavish freedom, the best tricks were the oldest ones. Safely out of the public eye, if one didn't count the flying spy cams of the amateur fans, those pests, those nuisances, Ramilla fled to her portable trailer. There, she powered down her spangled demolition costume, disembarked from it, dumped the wig, and sat before the darkened makeup mirror, panting for breath and chugging ice water. She sponged off her makeup, wrapped herself in anonymous black security gear, and ventured over to Glenn's trailer. Glenn was still running the event's dying spasms of street choreography, flicking her puck across an urban weave of placemarks and camera angles. "You were really on today," Glenn told her. "Yeah, the good people of La La Land, they sure love those big-budget effects." Glenn casually peeled up a screen, deployed some police muscle, and smoothed it back again. "No, Mila. Those street crowds love you. I checked their skin responses, their pulse rates, everything. They always love to watch some big, weird machine kick some ass, but without you in their picture to give them something to care about, nothing much matters to them." "Oh, it was just my slutty costume talking. Hot and sexy never really suits me." Glenn sighed. "I am waiting so hard for the day when you stop doing that." "Stop what?" "When you stop putting yourself down. You were terrific out there. You were close to perfect. Why can't you be happy about that for 1 minute? Stop selling yourself short all the time. I swear to God, that drives me crazy." "I'm not perfect. Toddy would have been super perfect. That is not the issue. Theodora is history. And anyway, Toddy was never as good as you think she was. Yes, she was a big popular star. So what? She was like any pop idol. She was a scared, hungry woman who needed the public to love her. And the public did love Toddy because Toddy loved her public. She was the love slave of those unwashed morons. She loved her more than she loved you, me, or herself. I should aspire to that level of artistry. Have you completely lost your mind? That is not artistry. And you could give a damn about the public, Mila. You wouldn't care if the public all got killed, and they still couldn't be. That's the amazing part." Glenn scratched at her control screen. "You will never be a great actress, but you've got some true rapport. You're a true pop star. You're like a gothic bride of Shiva. You strut out and shake your ass and smash about a city. They know you're very dark inside, because you are. You're very dark, and so are they. You're dark inside. Yes, I am dark inside. So. Alright, so what's eating you today, Glenn? Why are you being like this? I guess it wasn't my performance." Ramilla laughed. "You know why I aced all that? Because she wasn't watching. Just for once, she's really gone. I felt so free." Glenn sent a half-riotous crowd of fans stumbling down the street in a cavalcade of glowing dots. "I finally figured out what to do with myself. You got any gin in here? I will never marry," Glenn told his mother. "I will never have a child. Because I'm a minister. I cannot bear to have Toddy's
listen to me. Radmila sat down to listen. She put her cheek in her hand. Given that fact, said Paul, that I will never marry, never leave a family, and given the fact that you married into the family and you can't leave it either, well, we have to do something big. She built this huge tradition, and now she's gone. We are her heirs. That means it's all up to us. I'm listening to you, Radmila said. It's too bad that you can't stand your husband anymore. It's a big girl. At least John is the smartest guy in the family. He's smarter than you. Yes, that is true. Good, sir. But John is always in the Adriatic, or he's in orbit, or he's doing a charity tour of refugee camps, or he's working late hours at the bank, or he's in bed with one of your sisters. John is never going to be there for us. Anyway, John is not a star. John can't do the things you can do. John's a knight in shining armor. John is gallant to the ladies. John is a poor little rich boy who wants to rule the world. He's a mess inside. That is not true, Radmila said stoutly. There were 2 years, 20 months, when I was delirious about you. I don't care if I lived for 200 years, I'll never marry you. If I'd been burned into ashes and thrown out the airlock and scattered into orbit, it would have been worth it to me. I was so content. It was worth my whole life, every part of it, just to learn that love is possible. Lynn silently rolled her eyes. Of course, said Radmila. Then John did figure out some things about me. Men do that, said Lynn. Radmila was suddenly blanking with raw fatigue. She had just spent 2 hours rehearsing in dance. Her bones were numb. You've got a new boyfriend? Radmila said clumsily. You never act this strange without a new boyfriend. My mother just died, Lynn said patiently. That's what's new for me. Tari's worse than dead, and she's not even my mother. I'm not Tari. I do have one corner to go, where Tari and I are just the same. I have ambition. Uh-oh. So, we take over, said Lynn. You and me. That's what I want. That's my big plan. That's what I'm telling you. You play the major family star, and I am the tech support. It's very traditional. I make you our dynasty's Queen of Los Angeles. All the older people, there are investors and backers. They still matter because they have the capital. But you and me, we're the executive directors. We are the directorial team. Because you're the only one who understands me, and I'm the only one who understands you. That's right, isn't it? Of course that's right, Lynn. Radmila loved everyone in her family, but Lynn was the one she loved best, except for Larry. Because she trained us. So from now on, we do all the work. That makes you happy, Lynn? I want you to be happy. Shut up. This isn't a theme song, so stop talking like some kids-out drama queen. This is not about our being happy. That's not the way to frame this. We are the players. We take power because we belong in power. You're the grabbing firm, and I'm the back operation. The family firms are back. Are you cool with all of that? I get tired of repeating myself. Can we really get away with doing that? I will tell you how. They will give it to us if we ask for it in the right way. Every night, we go in for a family dinner. We put all the toys and machines aside. There's no calls, no prompts, no nothing. It's just us. We all sit there together and